Welcome to the voice thread for Office Ergonomics for IENG 321. This voice thread is rather lengthy, but as far as the number of slides go, but I'm going to try to keep the comments fairly brief because we're going to have a couple extra days and a lab on this topic in class, so I'm going to feel like you're going to get a lot of exposure to it. I do want you to pay a lot of attention to these slides. I'll try to speak a little less than I usually do so that it won't take quite so long to get through all the slides. There won't be a homework assignment for this section for Office Ergonomics. However, there will be a lab that you're going to do that begins the week before spring break, carries over the week after spring break, and then is due the following week. So you should have plenty of time, especially if you're around campus during spring break at all, even for a couple of days to get some work done on that. But if not, you should still have a week after spring break to finish it up. There'll also be a quiz after spring break, right after spring break. However, it'll be over this voice thread. You should, again, have a full week before spring break to familiarize yourself with the voice thread. Finally, there are a couple of chapters that might be relevant in the Cromer text. However, as we've been saying all along, it's more of a reference text than it is something that we're expecting you to know, word for word or anything like that. So don't read the whole thing if you don't want to. You can just skim through it, sort of catch on to some of the topics and some of the things that seem to be a little bit more relevant to the lab that you're going to do, for example, might be valuable. I really encourage you to take a look at these two resources, these links. Um, the first one is a really useful, interactive, um, I would call it an example of what a good office ergonomic workstation really looks like and how it's adjusted and why the various components are set up the way they are. It really examines neutral posture in the seated office setting. So I encourage you to look at that. Now, the second link is probably going to be really valuable to you when you do your lab. And if you do an office ergonomics related project at the end of the semester, it's also going to be valuable to you for that. For just for studying through the voice thread, you still should take a look there, click through the examples, kind of a lot of links in there, so just kind of click through them and see what you see. It's called an e-tool. It's put out by OSHA, and as you know, OSHA doesn't have an ergonomics standard, but they do provide a lot of support for ergonomics, and they can cite you for ergonomics under the general duty clause, as you know. So they're kind of invested in office ergonomics as much as anything else. So take a look at both of these links. I think you'll find them useful. One thing you really want to think about when you're doing ergonomics in an office setting is that the office is a big system, and it's actually a fairly complex system. If you think about all the moving parts in a major office, in an office that has 20, 30, 40, 50 people, various cubicles and managers and different floors in the same building, so that's kind of the geography of it. But you also think about what people are doing in the office, even though office work often involves the same kind of equipment, chairs and computers and printers and copiers and filing cabinets and things like that. The tasks themselves can vary dramatically, from telephone intensive things to computer work to design work of some kind, layouts, um, doing recording like I'm doing right now in my office, recording voice. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you do and all kinds of needs that you have, and there's never going to be a single setup that's going to work for everyone, probably not even to work for any two people. Probably everyone's going to need a relatively unique setup tailored for each person. So just like any other system, production system that we talk about in ergonomics, the office should be designed to fit its workers. This is an example of an office workstation. I don't know what the worker's doing in this station, but you can see that looks like I see a keyboard, a document holder, an old-fashioned CRT monitor, quite a few things kind of at the perimeter of the workstation. Maybe there's a scanner or a printer over in the corner. That may be a docking station right in front between the keyboard and the monitor, but I'm not sure. Take a look at this workstation and see if you can actually figure out what work is being performed here. I'm not sure. Maybe there needs to be some salon work done here. That's a pretty bad haircut. But other than that, I can see paperwork here, right? And then there's some paper that's being studied here. The keyboard is kind of off to the side. Looks like there's a printer over there, something else. Um, so, see if you can think about the nature of the work, because understanding what the work is really the only way to make sure that the job is designed, I should say, for the worker. So you have to assess what work is being performed. Okay, after you know what the work is supposed to be, at least at a given office, you have to begin to assess the risk factors for ergonomics problems. So look at this quick snapshot and see if you can begin to think about what some of the risk factors are here. The first things I notice are there's a huge window behind. So imagine all the glare reflecting off of eyes back to the screen, and it makes the screen look dark by comparison, because certainly the sunlight is going to be brighter than anything the monitor can produce. In addition, look at the eyesight. If the eyes are, say, about here, somewhere like that, that's barely at the bottom of the monitor. So to read something at the top, where we all like to read, look at the angle that's going to have to be some kind of angle about like that, something like that. So, that's already going to be an issue, and then there are undoubtedly going to be others. Okay, once you've designed or you understand the design of the job and what the actual work is that's supposed to go on in the station, then you've identified the risk factors for ergonomics problems there. It's actually maybe an obvious step, but you have to implement whatever improvements you recommend. And take this particular example. Um, there are some issues here that I don't even want to go into, but um, how do you get this person to change, to address ergonomics at this workstation, regardless of whether they know or don't know what those risk factors are? That's always a big challenge. A large part of the office system has to do with seating, has to do with the interface between the furniture, the hardware of the system, and you. And that interface is most felt in your chair if you're at a seated office, obviously. And in order to really understand seating, you have to understand the human back. Now, we're going to talk about what we call biomechanics a little bit later, and we're going to do a lot more with the back then. But for now, let's just look at some of the anthropometry, well, not anthropometry really, but the anatomy, I should say, of the back. You've probably heard some of these words mentioned before, but you may not realize exactly how they all fit together. For example, uh, the lumbar region of the back. That's really important in all ergonomics associated with the back, but to understand where that is in your body. That curve, that sort of concave part of your back here, that's your lumbar region. Notice how it curves in, right, towards the front of your body. So um, there's sort of room there for something to kind of push into your back and support it. The thoracic region is higher up. Notice it curves out from your body. It's convex along your back. And then your neck, again, you have more of a concave structure, though not as large of one as in the lumbar region. And then what we call the sacrum, which is not really your spinal vertebrae as such, but it is part of the backbone. So and it's again kind of, you might call that your tailbone. It's curved out again. So you see you have all these curves in your back. Your back's not straight. Um, and maintaining these curves helps support your body in the proper way. So understanding how those curves are impacted by your seated posture is kind of what seating, ergonomic seating anyway, is all about. This little graphic is kind of interesting. You really have to think about what you're doing, the task that you're doing, and how it actually affects your risk of injury. Notice you have three color codes here: high, moderate, and low, related to risk of injury. And that's directly related to the amount of force that your back is forced to exert in order to maintain your posture and to support the weight of your body. So notice standing upright, and this is for some average person. Who knows who that average person really is? But that average person may have 80 pounds of compressive force on the low back just from seated. That's probably related to the part of your body above your lumbar region. The half of your body above that part of the spine. So maybe this person weighs 150, 160 pounds. So about half of that weight supported by the lower back. Um, and so 80 pounds, that's fine. So that's pretty low risk of back injury just standing around. Suppose you pick up a box of 20 pounds and hold it 10 inches from the low back. Now, we're not going to talk about the biomechanics of calculating this, but you'll just have to trust me to say that 20 pounds actually gets converted due to some statics, moment of inertia, moment arm kind of things. And that turns into 170 pounds. So you're adding 90 pounds of compressive force just to hold that 20 pounds up. If you hold that 20 inches out instead of 10 inches, you've added another 90 pounds. You've basically doubled that. You've doubled the moment arm, you're doubling the extra weight, so you're up to 260 pounds. If you bend over and pick up a box, notice 635 pounds of compressive force. That goes from the low risk to the high risk of injury. I don't know about you, but I'm not really anxious to support 600 pounds with my body anytime soon. That's why everyone always talks about poor lifting posture, and as you even lifting 1 pound, when you bend over and you have such a large distance where you've been over to pick up the box, that's 460 pounds of compressive force on your back. 460 pounds just to pick up 1 pound, as opposed to just the 80 that it is to support your body weight. So think about why it is that back injuries occur. Even seated, you're not standing, but you're seated, so the chair is supporting some of you. You still have a significant amount of back stress on that lower back to support even lifting 1 pound. So, this is sort of just for illustrative purposes. I want you to see why it is we're so worried about the back. Here's another couple of interesting graphics. Notice just the difference between proper seated posture and poor seated posture. So if your seated posture, if you're supported by a nice lumbar support in your chair or a cushion or something that's designed to appropriately support your lumbar region, notice that's the on the far right-handed picture, that's the right hand posture, the upright posture, as opposed to the slumped posture. And again, look on the left where the spine itself is an illustration of the spine. You see that forced backwards, and notice there's no S-curve the way they're supposed to be when you're in that poor posture. Instead, it's kind of just one big curve. That lumbar region that's supposed to be concave and sort of curved in is not. It's curved out. That's a real problem. All right, what do we do about this? Well, to maintain what we call neutral posture, that we've mentioned many times in this class, when you're seated, you need to do a few things. First thing you need to do is to keep your head level or tilted down just a little. In other words, flexed just a little, so that your eyes are either cast straight ahead or cast just a small amount down. You never want to have your eyes cast up. Remember what we said all along, that any neck extension is a bad thing. Then you want to think about your shoulders. We want your shoulders to be relaxed. We don't want anything, it's kind of a shrugging motion where you're supporting something between your shoulder and your neck, or that your shoulders have to be raised for some reason. Maybe you have to lift your arms to reach the keyboard. You don't want anything that's causing your shoulders to be raised or pushed back or forward in some unnatural position, non-neutral. You want them to be relaxed, non-elevated, hunched, or rolled forward. You also want to think about your elbows. You want them to be close to your side. You don't want any abduction of the shoulder. You want your elbows basically, I mean, you don't want them to be so close to your side that you're cutting off circulation, but you want them to essentially be next to your side and bent at 90-degree angle. Okay? That's neutral posture. You always want to use the chair's backrest to support that lumbar region. If your chair doesn't have a good backrest, then you need to get a chair with one if you're going to be in that chair for any length of time, because it's going to inevitably over time deteriorate your comfort level and your productivity, as well as potentially cause some injuries. Unfortunately, our body is not designed to do anything for 8 to 10 hours a day without change. It just doesn't work. And even if you're in the perfect posture, you still need to change it. But if you're in a less than perfect posture, even small amount of time, an hour or two at a time every day is going to cause issues. So support that lumbar region. A lot of people think the back support on their chair is for their upper back, for their shoulders, for the thoracic region, and it's not. It's for the lower back, for the lumbar region. You also want to have your body upright. Now, this is a real problem because we all think that slouching is comfortable. We buy furniture so that we can slouch in it, recliners and things. But in your chair, when you're slouching, you are lengthening the moment arm that your muscles of your lower back have to work with in order to support your body. You're not helping your body at all. You're actually making your body work harder to support yourself. And that's where strains and other issues come in, as well as having more compressive force on those discs that lead to hernias and ruptured discs. Remember to keep those wrists straight. The upper extremities are another major problem area for offices. You want to make sure that your wrists are not ulnar or radial deviated or flexed or extended, that they're nice and flat, that you can draw a line from your elbow, or your inner elbow really, straight down your arm to your middle knuckle without any curving. Okay, that would eliminate the ulnar radial deviation, and that you're not curving that wrist back or forward, flexing or extending it. You want to think about your knees. The optimal place is for your knees to be a little lower than your hips. In other words, your knees aren't up in your face or up in your chest, right? You're not bending them, the knees higher. Knees are a little lower, but if they're perfectly level with the floor, your thighs are a little level with the floor, that works too. But you don't want the back of your legs and your knees to have compressive pressure on them. So in other words, you don't want your knees to be pressing up against the chair. Notice how here there's a little space between the edge of the chair and the knees. So that eliminates the knees being constantly compressed. Don't forget about your feet. Right now, even as an ergonomics professor in an office, talking about office ergonomics, I'm still struggling to keep my feet flat on the floor because I want to cross my legs, prop them up, stand on my toes, kind of bend them under the chair sometimes or stick them out in front of me. But I'm not doing myself anything but a disservice by doing that. Feet flat on the floor and supported. In other words, they're not dangling or kind of just on one toe or something like that. Flat on the floor and supported. If your anthropometry or your particular office setup does not allow you to have your feet flat on the floor, then there are many footrests and kind of curved and contoured things you can get to support you. And there's no reason to just let that go unnecessarily. The next couple of slides, we're going to show you what we call some posture options. Now, the postures I've just described to you on the previous slides are essentially for this one that we're illustrating on this slide, the 90-degree posture, where you have the upright seating, you have your hips kind of at 90 degrees, your elbows at 90 degrees, your feet, ankles, and your knees all at 90 degrees. And then you have your wrists straight and your head basically upright and straight, your neck not leaning back or too far forward anyway. However, this is not the only posture. This is perhaps what everyone considers the classic posture, and it's never a bad idea. There are a few others where in certain circumstances you can get away with the different postures. We'll talk about those on the next slides. Standing posture. Now, we are talking about office ergonomics, and you may say to yourself, in what offices do you stand for any length of time? But there are some. Actually, there are standing workstations you can get for your office if you are a stander, or if you want an adjustable workstation where you stand sometimes and sits other times. A lot of people like to stand, and you'll see this, I would say, more and more you'll see standing workstations even for the office setting. But there are also kind of hybrid offices, maybe out on a factory floor. You'll sort of have a data entry position where you're kind of doing office-like work, but it's not a permanent office, and so you'll just have a standing workstation. Or if you think about like a checkout clerk, they have a computer, they have a writing area, they have lots of areas, but they're standing all day. So in those kinds of situations, you don't have a lot of choice. So again, it is an alternative to sitting 100% of the time. It may not be the best alternative for the work that you're doing, and I'm not saying you should stand in every situation or should you stand all the time. But sometimes it's going to be applicable. And notice the posture here. You still maintain that 90-degree angle at your elbows, though your knees may be maybe not completely straight because you don't want to lock them, but essentially straight. You don't want to be hunched. But the neck can become a problem, so you want to make sure your neck isn't flexed forward too far. And here's another one, and this one I probably don't have enough time here on this slide to illustrate how to do this right. So let me just kind of point it out there as an option that if you are interested in this option, especially in your ergonomics projects or your labs, you should investigate it further. Talk to me about it or whatever. But the forward tilt, this is where you can see, you think about from the knees to the hip along the femur, it's not flat, it's not parallel to the ground. It's tilted forward a few degrees, you could say. 8 degrees perhaps is what this is. I would say that this little diagram probably has maybe more like 10 or 12 degrees, but maybe even 15. The point is you're not standing, nor are you slipping off of the chair, but you do have a little bit of tilt forward. Now this allows your back to maintain that lumbar arc a little more easily. So that's kind of one of the benefits, although you are putting some of the other areas in less than optimal posture to support that back. So, there's a trade-off maybe you could say. Notice a contoured chair, a chair that's kind of a little more contoured to that lower back can help you kind of feel more natural in this posture. And certainly a seat that is capable of adjusting the tilt of the seat pan would probably be maybe even a requirement. You'll also notice there's a contour back function that also, or a recline back function that's kind of similar. Recline back 10 to 20 degrees. And for this to happen, though, notice the workstation is well over the knees. The knees are here, and the typing is going on here. So you don't want to, if you don't have that capability, then this would not work for you. You don't want to have to reach forward and from this posture. That would be really bad. But the neck can still become an issue because you're putting the neck back and then requiring it to sort of, notice, this is the spine. So even to have the neck looking straight forward, you sort of have to have this angle here. So this may not be optimal unless there are certain situations where it really works. So now the question is, what's the best posture? I don't know. uh, Most people will tell you what we would call the neutral posture, which we illustrated a few slides ago as the 90-degree posture, is the best. That's probably because it's usually a good posture for just about any situation. If you can make it work, then it's going to be okay. There may be perfectly tuned postures for a given work setting that are not neutral, but they're perfectly tuned for the work you're doing there. So in other words, you start with the neutral and you make a tweak here that actually improves based on the work that you're doing. So that's what I would suggest. Don't start with one of these non-neutral ones. Start with a neutral posture, but if there's something that what you know about ergonomics isn't really working perfectly, see if you can tweak it a little bit, and it might, maybe you tilt back or you tilt forward or you lower something, you raise something from that neutral, and it becomes a better situation. But you have to think about, okay, maybe if I adjust for the wrists, am I causing problems in the neck? So you really have to look at the big picture. Don't feel also that there's one posture that's going to work for you all the time. Movement between postures, adjustability, flexibility is better. Your body doesn't like to be even in the perfect posture. That's like sleeping all day. Anyone ever slept in the most comfortable bed in the world, but if you sleep in it for 15 hours, your back hurts, or you just can't be in that posture anymore? That's happened to me. Not maybe not 15 hours, but one of the most important things that you can think about when you're trying to set up your office in the most ergonomic friendly way is the chair. And one of the most important things about a chair is its adjustability. You already know that adjustability is the secret of ergonomics, and I'm going to go ahead and say probably never will you see that more concentrated in the level of adjustability probably than in the chair. A good chair is going to have not just one or two levels of adjustability. Now, notice the slide mentions that 80% of the contact with your office workstation is going to be in the chair. Think about how often you're in a chair. If you're working in an office situation, how much time is spent there. Yeah, you contact your computer equipment pretty often, but the chair is always. So you want to get it right. This slide shows you a few of the areas where you'll want to look for particular ergonomic design. First of all, and I'm going to say foremost, the lumbar support. Um, this is why we don't sit on bar stools to work at computers, because the lumbar support for that level of work all day, we're not even sitting with our arms down by our sides. They're out in front of us in the neutral posture with 90-degree elbows. They're working at the keyboard, but we are exerting force and sometimes picking things up far away from our back, even when we're in neutral posture with the phone or books or whatever it is we're using at our desk. In order to maintain proper back posture, you must have that lumbar support, and it must be adjusted properly for the lumbar region of your back, the lower back. Also, so you have to make sure that the height and tilt of that back support is adjustable as well. If you get a chair that doesn't adjust the back support height, how do you know it's fitting your lumbar region? And we're all different. Maybe it will fit someone but not you, or maybe it will fit you but not the next person. Also, the tilt, the angle. That one may be less common, but it's also pretty valuable because, again, we're all different sizes and different shapes, and that has to do with the depth at which I sit, for example, or if I'm going to sit in one of those non-90-degree postures that we mentioned a few minutes ago. Notice also the controls for the height of the seat pan, the up and down, as well as the tilt of the seat pan so that it can tilt a little bit back or a little bit forward. Those need to be easy to get to and easy to use. Simple levers, paddle controls are pretty easy. If you have to screw something on or off or turn a knob, it's very unlikely that you're actually going to go through the trouble to adjust that. Notice the padded and removable and adjustable armrests. The fixed armrest, which by the way, my chair right now at my desk that I'm sitting in has fixed armrests. They're not adjustable in any way. I can take them off with the proper tools. That's about it. Um, that may be better than nothing sometimes. Sometimes it might be worse than nothing because if they're pushing my shoulders up, or if I have to lean over to one side in order to use the armrest, even though I may think I need it, it's not helping me at all. So you need to be able to adjust to the right height to maintain the proper elbow and shoulder postures as well as wrist postures, because the armrest will affect your wrist posture. In and out, not just up and down, because everyone's not just has different height, but we have different widths, shoulder widths, etc. So do I have to squish my elbows to my side to reach the armrest, or do I have to abduct my elbows and basically have the chicken wing going in order to find the armrest out to the side? You need to be able to adjust in that direction as well. You'll also notice this, what we call the waterfall front edge, right? That means that the chair doesn't just end abruptly. It kind of trails off, right? Trails off at a nice, ever-increasing slope, a waterfall kind of thing. That sort of minimizes that unnecessary compression on the inside of our knees. Over the next couple of slides, I'm just going to point out a few interesting features in some of the chairs you may find available. This is an old contoured saddle chair that I actually used to use when I was a grad student, because we don't get to choose our chairs. At least we had chairs, I guess. Notice there are some good adjustable features on this chair, but I didn't care for the contoured saddle, um, because what if my particular upper leg thigh region doesn't really fit that contour very well, or my butt doesn't fit that contour very well? Then I'm forced to adjust to something that's not designed for me, and as we've already known in ergonomics, that doesn't work very well. There, if you had that designed for you, maybe there's lots of different options, and you can choose the one that works well for you. Maybe this is a good thing, but for me, it wasn't. This same chair also had an inflatable lumbar support, and I did like this because everyone's back, although curved in the lumbar region, we have different levels of curvature there, different also general fitness levels, where that lower back area sometimes is the place where we see that love handle start to blossom, you might say. That affects that curvature, as well as just general height areas. And so inflating or deflating that lumbar support to just the proper amount of curvature worked really well. However, a problem with that style was over time that air pressure deflates, as anything will, a balloon or anything else. So you have to manually inflate that thing pretty often. And that level of constant attention and maintenance necessary to maintain proper adjustability, could start to fall by the wayside for after a while. Another level of support that's a little less common than lumbar support would be the high back or thoracic region support. Now remember, your high back area is actually curved out, it's convex, and so you'll need something that supports that curvature that's in an outward fashion. So notice you can see the lumbar area here, right? And that's curved in to get support, and then it curves out to support that curvature of the thoracic region. So you're supporting multiple of those. There's, you even have a little bit of head support up here that's curved in again for that cervix support. This is a newer version of a molded chair, but this style of molding goes back, decades, and you certainly will see older style chairs where basically the designers have decided, maybe they've designed for 95% of the population, maybe just 50th percentile, I don't know, but they've curved this in a non-adjustable way, right? This curvature of lumbar support is kind of fixed. It might flex a little bit, but it's not, high and low adjustment or in and out adjustment or inflatable or anything like that. It's just kind of molded for a certain design. You'll see that, you saw it in the saddle for a couple of chairs ago. You'll see even here there's a little bit of molding. They're trying to do something that's better than the old-fashioned straight back and flat chair, but this may or may not fit you. So that's one you have to test out to see if it works for you. For some reason, especially if we're lifetime office workers, something about that corner office with the windows and the executive desk chair, the big conference table, all that just seems like we've made it. That we have the real good office job now. And somehow this executive style chair comes with the package often, as though it's a good thing. Notice what you have. This is very similar to the chair I have that someone thought they were getting me as a favor, but notice fixed armrests, no adjustability. Now they are curved a little bit, so you can get support in high or low areas depending on what you're doing. The contoured molded style, it does have a thoracic support, but it's not adjustable, so it may not work for you. And notice the back really doesn't adjust much at all. Probably the only adjustment you're going to find in this chair is the height of the seat pan, and that's it. One adjustment. Think of all the other areas that your body's contacting and all the potential for it being a poor design for you. Now let's talk about the work surface. Here we see one of my old professors, Dr. Smith, and his workstation. You're going to see another picture, maybe later in the slideshow, I'm not sure, of this workstation. And Dr. Smith had a fairly large office and the ability to have multiple work areas. This was his computer work area. You can't really tell, but he has two monitors here, a double monitor, right? So that is an invention of, say, the last 5 or 6 years, maybe, where that became really common. But that does change some of the things we're going to talk about with how you use your work surface. And notice some of the other things here. Yes, it's convenient to have drawers and other filing storage below the desk surface, but that impinges your ability to have appropriate legroom to get a footrest in there if you need to, etc. So oftentimes open tables, open leg tables, rather than kind of cramped drawers and filing cabinet stuff stuffed under your desk, or other hardware, computers, printers, other things stuffed under your desk. Sometimes you'll find the old monitor. You got a new monitor, nice big flat screen. You replaced that old CRT that you had for 10 years, and you stuffed it under the desk for no reason, just because you didn't have anywhere else to put it. So keep that leg room. Avoid those sharp edges. Dr. Smith's desk had very sharp edges. I don't know if you can see them there. It just dropped off. Corners were sharp. And there's no adjustment on this old wooden desk. You can't adjust the height. You can't extend the tray for the keyboard. Notice this keyboard's way up here away from his body. What you want to do is you want to think about what you're actually doing and lay out your work surface accordingly. The work that you do every day needs to be right in front of you. The work that you do sometimes a little farther away, and then the things that really isn't work, it's more about storage. You got to put things there, the picture of your spouse and your kids, or your desk clock that you don't ever touch. It just needs to be in visual distance, that kind of thing. Old, your tape dispenser that you use once a year maybe could go there. You want to think about that, and then you still want to look for, and this is in metric system, you can see in centimeters, but still you want to think about putting these things in what we would call these reach zones. I'll show you a little bit more about that on the next slide. But placing these things here, left and right hand, you think about it there. So what do you do most often? Do you keyboard and mouse? Well, make sure that's here. Don't put it way out away from you. Do you use the telephone, or is that the primary function of the desk? Or is it for writing, grading papers, for example? Then make writing space. Don't put the writing space really far away. Here, these reach arcs, you can see they're sort of adjusted from left hand to right hand. Notice how they're slightly more contoured and here in the middle. So if you're left-handed, obviously you want to have writing space on the left-handed side, not on the right-handed side, for example. If you're left-handed, using your right hand for the telephone might be a really good option. So put that on the right-hand side. Notice the number of inches, 13 to 17 inches away from the body is kind of optimal. You don't want to put it too close. Have you ever tried to write 2 inches from your chest? It's kind of hard. So again, you want to think 13 to 17 inches away from your body is a primary hand usage zone for the most primary tasks that you do, your mouse, your keyboard, your writing stuff. A little bit further away for that secondary stuff. You can do work there, but it shouldn't be your primary tasks. And let's talk about the vertical reach arc. It's not just a horizontal job. A lot of times you have hutches, shelving, etc. in your work area that allows you to do some storage or some other things above the flat surface of your desk. That reach zone, notice the kind of angle here. What is that, about 20 degrees? 20 degrees, something like that, right? Maybe 30 at the most. If you have to reach up at a 45-degree angle to reach it, it's too far away for something you're going to have to reach at any kind of common level. Filing cabinet that you use all the time shouldn't be that high at your desk. Okay, your easy reach zone right in front of you at elbow height, a little high, a little lower. Then notice kind of at shoulder height, maybe slightly above. Is your maximum reach. If you've got to go above shoulder for it routinely, not going to work. Here's an example of a workstation for a graduate student from a few years ago who will remain nameless. And notice this desk, it has a lowered keyboard. So because in order to get neutral posture, sometimes the desk is a little too high. So to get that 90-degree elbow angle, you're able to lower that keyboard. The problem is with this split keyboard design, there wasn't enough room for the mouse and the mouse pad. So you can see there's just a little room over here, not really enough for the mousing test. So the mouse had to go up here. Well, it turns out this wasn't a good desk setup. Look how high the monitor is. The phone's way over here. That's fine if the phone never gets used. And in this particular workstation, it never got used. But if I get 3 or 4 phone calls a day, and this were my workstation, maybe the phone is not in the right place. I mean, the tape dispenser is closer than the phone. Is that appropriate? The Dilbert calendar is even closer, right? Is that appropriate? The speakers, do they need to be taking up space? Can we put those? I mean, we never touch those other than the volume control, maybe. Can we put those farther away? It does have a document holder. Then a printer, of course. How often do we use these things? Notice down below. This is looking a little sketchy. An awful lot of cords. Do I kick those cords? Do I accidentally flip the circuit breaker? I'm sorry, the power strip power? Is this in giving enough leg room? There's a lot of decision making. We do have an extra workstation over here. My guess is this is the writing workstation, so you can turn and write. But if you're doing keyboarding tasks, this would not be the place to put the documents that you're looking at and keying in information in the computer, so that you have to turn 90 degrees. We think about all of these things. Here's another work surface. Notice this work surface would hopefully not be one where mousing and keyboarding is the primary function, because it's not in that primary reach zone. It's kind of out in the peripheral reach zone. So maybe this is a GTA who's creating a lot of papers, and that's the primary. That's why you have this area reserved for paperwork and clear. Maybe. If that's not the case, though, we need to rethink this. Notice the angle that the neck is having to be put in just because of where this stuff is placed. We have some storage up here. If that the phone that I'm seeing, is that going to be answered every day? Think about that. Okay, now let's think about monitors. Um, there's a couple of things that you really focus on when you're talking about monitors. One of those concerns is its orientation to your eyesight. You want to think about its height, the distance, and the angle of the screen. So the height being how tall is the top of the monitor. Often that's the portion of the monitor that we want to focus on, kind of right where the actual display begins below the top of the frame part of the monitor screen. The angle being, is it perfectly vertical or is it leaned back a little bit? And then distance between your eyes and the front of the screen, how far is that distance? Those are the kinds of things we want to talk about. We also think about things like how close is the monitor to the documents that you're often referring to at the same time as working. So if you're working from both paper and screen, how close together are those things? Is there a glare? And the glare can come from a variety of sources. We'll talk about that. The color of the font, the color of the background, a lot of things like that. You also want to think about the angle of the screen with regard to your torso. In other words, do I have to turn my head left or right to look directly at the screen, or is it right in front of me? Okay, you're generally going to want to adjust the height of the monitor so that it is 10 to 20 degrees below your horizontal line of sight. So to get the horizontal line of sight, I have to think about drawing a horizontal line from my eyes to the monitor screen. So in this example, you can see that the top of the monitor screen is actually above the horizontal line of sight. So that angle there, this is a terrible line, but that would be the angle. In this case, this monitor is way too high. As you can see, the horizontal line of sight is somewhere around the bottom of the monitor. You generally want that horizontal line of sight to be 10 to 20 degrees, the middle of the monitor to be 10 to 20 degrees below the horizontal line of sight. Another way of thinking about that is you want the horizontal line of sight to effectively be to the top of the monitor, not to here of the monitor, but to the top of the actual screen of the monitor. That will generally put the middle of it about 10 to 20 degrees below your line of sight, and that's the best place most of the time. Now thinking about horizontal distance, you want to make sure that the monitor is, well, ideally between 18 and 30 inches. You'll see these numbers vary, 20 to 30, 20 to 40, 18 to 40, but you'll never really see the range 18 to 30. That's kind of a conservative range. If you're within that range, you're almost always good. Um, there are times when you want it farther away. There are times when you want it closer. And designing again for the task you're doing and for the individual is good. Um, the goal is to be able to read the text on the monitor without squinting or leaning forward. You've probably seen individuals, especially as they age or if they change eyewear, go to bifocals or something like that, you'll see leaning, sometimes leaning backwards, sometimes leaning forward, squinting, hunching, doing anything to try to get closer to the monitor or farther away so that they can read what's on the screen. There are lots of things you can do to adjust that, the font size of the monitor, for example, the resolution of the screen, but often just simply putting the monitor in the right horizontal distance from the eyes is the best way to go. So the optimal location usually is between 18 and 30 inches, but the truth is it's just close enough that you don't have to lean in or squint, but otherwise far enough away that you're not, so close that your eyes burn from the brightness of the monitor. The angle of the monitor screen, in other words, the tilt, um, most monitors can be adjusted in this fashion. Not all of them. Some of them are pretty much vertical and that's it. But you usually can lean it back a little bit. You usually can't lean it very forward, and that's probably a good thing, unless you're a small child in a chair that's designed for an adult. You're probably not going to lean it forward. You want to lean it back 10 to 20 degrees, but the goal is to draw that horizontal line from your eyes to the middle of the monitor. Remember, it should be 10 to 20 degrees um, down, so that means that the corresponding angle of the monitor should be 10 to 20 degrees up in order to meet that line of sight and meet it such that the monitor is perpendicular to your line of sight. So that's really what you want to see. You want to see a monitor angle here, and then line of sight here, and you want that to be perpendicular. Usually that's going to be at a small angle. Real quick, here's an example of illustration, I guess, of putting some of these distances and angles in practice. You can see the tilt of the monitor. You can see the lower line of sight. Now here they actually have the line of sight 10 to 20 degrees to the top of the monitor. That's really not perfect. You really want to go 10 to 20 degrees to the middle. But still, you can see her eyes are just slightly below the top. And then basically the same angle for the tilt here as to the angle between eyes and horizontal. You also notice the 18 to 30 inches. That's a pretty good thing. So this may help you. I want to make a couple of clarifications for large monitors. Now, when the ergonomics guidelines were really being designed for offices, monitors were much smaller than they are now. So it wasn't very common to see a monitor over 15 inches in the 90s. Uh, a lot of these guidelines came about in the early 90s to mid 90s and were even updated the late 90s, 2000s when we really weren't facing the fact that people liked really large monitors, really large flat screens or double monitors, etc. Nowadays, if it's a desktop monitor, it's usually going to be a minimum of 17 inches. 19, 21, 24 inches could be a lot bigger. So we have to make some accommodations to those guidelines to accommodate these larger monitors. So they often will need to be pushed back farther than the guidelines, or at least on the larger end of those distance guidelines. So, you know, maybe it will be 30, 35 inches from the eyes. Again, what's the real way to know if you're at the right distance? Can you read the text without squinting? Push it back a little. Can you read without squinting or leaning in? Push back a little. Can you read without squinting or leaning in? You want to be somewhere far enough away that you're not having eye fatigue, but close enough to be able to read without squinting or leaning in. Larger fonts can have some effect too, and because the monitors are bigger, a lot of times that gives the resolution options, and people like to have their resolution set really small, but that may not be the way to go. Another interesting take is that as we've moved away from desktops to laptops, laptop screens, while they have gotten larger, are still on the small side by comparison. So 15 inches or smaller are pretty common among laptops, especially the tiny notebooks and netbook laptops or an iPad size screen or something like that are very small. And so you really want to think, am I using the monitor of the laptop, but I had it set up at a distance that I would have for my normal 19-inch flat screen monitor? Those things don't work the same way, so don't use the same setup if you're changing between screens. Now let's think about the documents that we use, and most people will use both documents and the computer screen simultaneously, at least sometimes. Whether or not those documents need to be placed in a document holder kind of depends on the work layout of the desk, of the purpose for the document, how often you have to refer to it, or do you read the document for a while and then use the keyboard for a while, or is it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth constantly? Those kinds of things. If you are going to need to refer to a document regularly throughout your computer use back and forth, you don't want that document to be placed so that your eyes have to be craned back and forth and refocusing. It's the focusing far away, close up, far away, close up. That change in eye focus does cause fatigue. Now, the counter to that is if you never change your eye focus, it also causes fatigue. So pretty much just like any other ergonomics things, you don't want to do things too frequently, and you don't want to do things for too long. And so we kind of have a balance here. But generally, notice in this picture, the documents kind of, if you think about it, this is kind of an angle, right? And your eyesight is here, right? You can kind of see that depending on where you're looking, you're kind of at the same distance from your eye, at least a little. It's in the ballpark. And you can cast your eyes down a little bit, then up a little bit, and without missing too much. Now, you'll also see documents that are very close to the screen, like here, and so that they're almost an extension of the screen, and that allows you just to pan a little bit to left or right. Either way, what you're trying to do is you're trying to minimize the frequent refocusing while still being able to access the document in a reasonable fashion. You'll see these stand-up kind of freestanding document holders sometimes. They're not as common as they used to be. So you can put those anywhere, and all they do is basically take the document off of a flat surface and elevate it and allow you to move it around. It takes up a little bit less room on your desk than a full 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper would, and it sort of puts it more in the line of sight of the monitor. You can move it accordingly. Now this one isn't particularly located well. As you can see, it's a lot closer to the user than the monitor. Here's another one. This one is sort of a little bit more fixed to the location. It's not very, you can't move it around anywhere. And usually you'll want to adjust this rotating arm so that it rotates right next to the monitor screen, which is what this person has done. You can see that, you know, a little bit of an angle here between the center and the document, but that's not too bad as long as it's in the same elevation and in the same sort of distance. That usually works okay. You'll see a lot of these newer style document holders that really are part of a larger docking system for a laptop computer. This is just one option where you slide the laptop in, and since you have an external keyboard here, you don't really need this laptop keyboard very often, so it's it's a good place basically to clip on documents. So it has sort of a metal holder for documents, and you clip them in or whatever, slide them over. You'll see that kind of stuff actually pretty often. There are other systems though, docking stations for laptops. So in other words, you turn your laptop into a little bit more functional desktop area, and part of that might be document holding, and then of course there's other parts of it as well. Here we're still using the laptop monitor, and one of the downsides of this is look at the distance between the monitor and even the keyboard. And this monitor is fairly small, and so think about this distance to the eyes. Just putting this document in between here, forcing this distance to be longer, is that the best thing to do for a smaller laptop screen? May not. This is a good example of how focusing on simply one component of the work system in the office at the expense of another component could be a problem, and so you want to think of the system as a whole. So thinking about keyboards now, keyboard design has changed in some facets over the last 10 to 15 years, and in others though it stayed exactly the same, and we still have a QWERTY keyboard on most key systems. We haven't gone to more radical key placement on keyboards very often, but you will see a few advances, so that if you were to use an older keyboard 10 to 15 years ago and you're not used to it, you would notice right away that, oh, this is an old keyboard. So let's think about what those kinds of things really are. Well, some of the problems with the conventional keyboard is that it forces your wrists and hands and arms into non-neutral postures. The palms are forced down in a pronated fashion so that all the 5 fingers can touch the keyboard. That's not a neutral posture. Often the hands have to bend at the wrist. Sometimes they have to extend. Sometimes they have to flex. That's up and down. Also, pretty much always they have to bend, usually in the ulnar direction, the thumbs out direction, in order to use the keyboard, because the keyboard itself is fairly narrow. So if you think about the width of your arms, right, this is your shoulder, right, the width of your arm, and then the width of the keyboard is much smaller, and so you have to bend those arms in. And to bend the arms in, that's one problem, because you're probably having to abduct these shoulders out here. The other problem is your wrist is not aligned with your forearm. Here's an example of the, in this case, this is wrist extension, where the wrist is bent back a little bit, and that's because this keyboard has got a fixed wedge here that elevates it. Those are really old style. Now most keyboards have flip up legs, but because those legs exist when people set up their computers, they just think, well, they must serve a purpose, I'll flip them up, without really thinking if that's doing the right thing for your body. So again, see this angle here above the surface? Look what it's doing to your wrists. Another problem with keyboards is that they're flat. What does that mean? Well, this one may be something you haven't thought of before. Your middle finger is usually your longest finger, then probably your ring finger, and then your index finger third, but those may be switched. In order for all 4 fingers to touch at the same level of keys, you have to press down with your shorter fingers a lot more than you do with here. So that means that your hand isn't flat here at the top, it's rounded. I don't know about you, but in order to round my knuckles, I have to do some funny things with them. So that you're basically extending, or rather flexing this finger, flexing the pinky finger a lot, and that's not a finger you generally want to use a lot of. So this posture here with this rounding of the knuckles can be fatiguing over time. If you have the zoom feature on VoiceThread, you might want to zoom into each of these if you need a little extra visual acuity. There's a couple of things going on here. Look, here's an example of what you're doing in pronation, right? In order to use the keyboard with your fingers all pointed down, you've got to do this rotation in pronation to get away from neutral posture, just to be able to access the keyboard. then you'll see this this ulnar deviation here, pretty severe angle, in order to use the keyboard in the in the home position, right? In the J, K, L, comma position of the right hand, and the same thing would be for the ASDF position over here for the left hand. These hands are, look how close together usually your hands are. They're two keys away from index finger to index finger. That's just a matter of a couple of inches. Well, think about where your hands should be in neutral posture. They should be the entire width of your shoulders apart. But instead, they're only a couple of inches apart. In order to do that, we have to both abduct our shoulders and ulnar deviate our wrists in this picture. So both of those things are problems. One way that people have tried to address some of the issues that the traditional keyboard does to the body is they've designed alternative keyboards. You've probably seen a bunch of these, and you may be using them, and you may not realize you're using them because of the changes when the changes are subtle. But some of the changes are far from subtle, and I'll show you some examples. But the goal of any of the alternative keyboards is to try to bring the posture a little bit more neutral, whether they're adding rests for the body to sort of elevate a little bit of the wrist so that it's not so extended, or whether they're just simply realizing that those postures are fatiguing and we're trying to do something to comfort those areas. Any of these alternative keyboards are trying to address the issues we've just mentioned. This diagram shows something that you probably don't see very often anymore, but you still will see it, and that's that the keys are not all lined up in just nice straight rows. Instead, they're curved, and that curvature is trying to address the length of the fingers, right? Because if the middle finger is longer, the keys you generally use the middle finger for should be farther away. If the thumb and pinky are short, those keys for those fingers should be a little closer to you, right? It's just thinking about the reach of each finger individually. You will also occasionally still see some concave keyboards, and that is where, again, the keys designed for the middle finger are lower than the keys designed for the outer fingers or the thumb. And again, that's just trying to sort of make this a little less of a curve here at the top over the knuckles and be a little less fatiguing. You'll also see that the concave, since they're going ahead and altering the shape, they'll sometimes change the distance as well. But in this case, notice the middle keys here kind of look closer than the external keys, the outer keys. And do I have to reach farther? Maybe they're a little higher, but if I'm having to reach farther for them with my pinky, I may not be doing myself any good. You'll also see keyboards that are trying to eliminate some of the wrist twisting, some of the pronation that's required. And by doing that, it sometimes helps some of the extension problems and even some of the shoulder problems that you'll experience, depending on the design itself. So this is kind of an old-fashioned tinted keyboard. You don't see that quite as much, where basically the keys just kind of elevate in the center here and raise up. But if that did at least eliminate some of that pronation, you're able to be a little bit more neutral posture, sort of more of a handshake, less of a flat palm. We call that a tinted keyboard. This one at the bottom is a little newer, and it's kind of rotated. I don't know if you can tell. In addition to being elevated and tinted, it actually kind of rotates this way a little bit, and you can adjust that. That adjustability is nice, and so you can sort of rotate those keys around. That could be really good from the wrist point of view, but I think if you rotate it too far around, you really have to abduct your shoulders in order to get those hands there. I just have to see it in action. And this is just on a website that's for sale. I'm not sure I've ever seen one of these in action. Another good idea is to have a negative slope with your keyboard, or at least a flat slope. Negative is probably better for most setups. Notice when you have these, again, this upsloped keyboard, it really causes basically that same angle to appear in extension on your wrist, which is a problem. A negative slope means that the keyboard is kind of designed so that the back is actually lower than the front. And that's a good thing because the back is where your middle fingers sometimes go. But in addition, it mostly lets this wrist stay flat, which is something you always want to do, flat wrist. However, a flat no-slope keyboard probably can do some of this as well. It just really depends on your chair setup, whether you have a keyboard tray or whether you're putting on a desktop, etc. There's a lot of things that can factor into whether a negative slope is right for you. The upslope is almost always wrong. How many of you have used one of these natural keyboard designs? Microsoft has had this out for over a decade probably. And this natural design, I used it myself to write my master's thesis. I got used to it, and it was pretty effective. One of the problems for me were that when I used the number keys, and I was taught to use the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, to use my actual hands properly designed for the number keys. But these keys were split up between left and right hand so that you could not use the other hand. And I was taught differently than the split that they chose. So for example, I always wanted to reach across this gap to hit this number key over here because it wasn't the key, it wasn't designed for my right hand as far as I was concerned. So that was a challenge to my historical typing training to use this keyboard. So I would often make mistakes. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It may be more comfortable because my wrists were in a better position, but sometimes I would make more errors than I would have with the regular keyboard. Now let's think about mice or the mousing system for your computer. You don't always actually have a mouse, at least by the traditional definition. Notice our skeleton Bob here is using this Microsoft mouse, which is, at least when it was introduced, was considered an ergonomic design. It's contoured, it's a right-handed design, but notice what's happening to the wrist here. You can still see this pretty significant curvature. I'm not doing a good job with my drawing, but you can see there's an angle there. It's not flat, but it does need to fit into the palm, right? You don't want to have to kind of reach around the mouse in order to make clicks. It should fit nice and snug in the palm, but not with hard surfaces or corners or anything like that. Here you see a mouse pad with a wrist rest, and that's one of the benefits of the padding, is that it elevates the wrist a little bit here, a little bit of height, so that the part that was already high around the fingers is at about the same level as the wrist, as the ulnar and radial bones, I should say. So that eliminates some of that angle. It's a lot flatter. The problem that could come with this is that we're generally elevating our forearm here a few inches. Now it's only a couple inches, but what is that doing to our shoulder, to our elbow, etc.? Are we sacrificing other postures just to have this neutral posture at the wrist? Chances are you are affecting that. What you have to decide, though, is which is more important. Which angle really is causing the most problem? If it's only 1 or 2 inches here of padding, if that's only raising your shoulder an inch, maybe you don't even notice because your shoulder's a really large joint. Or maybe if your elbows, instead of being at a perfect 90-degree angle, now it's at an 88-degree angle. Maybe that's not a big problem either. So maybe it's worth that slight non-neutral posture at the elbow to get a much better posture here at the wrist. You'd have to see the whole system again. When I was an undergraduate, way back a long time ago, we had to use the mouse on the left. That's an old-fashioned 3-button mouse, one of the first 3-button mice that they had. And notice the shape. It's kind of just a semicircular, strange, boxy, cornered thing. And the click, the buttons were just as far on either side as they were from the middle, and they were not very large buttons, right? You had to be accurate. You couldn't miss, you could easily miss and hit the wrong button. They were kind of close together. Then you have, what's become probably the standard mouse, the very basic standard design nowadays. This contoured mouse. This is contoured for the right hand, by the way. Okay, if you're left-handed, this could be an issue for you. With the scroll bar and button in the middle, and you know, the left click button, which is more often clicked for a right-handed user, is larger than the right click button. But that's for a right-handed user. As we've made better and better improvements for ergonomics with the mousing system, you see a lot more what you might think fancy designs. Now these are definitely on the higher end of fancy because my current mouse is not nearly this kind of unique looking, yet it still has several features. So there's lots of other ergonomic mice that they don't have to be this crazy. um, what you will see though is these joystick style mice are starting to be a little more popular because you're able to keep your hand. You can already kind of imagine if your thumb's here, your fingers are here, right? This is not pronated, so that's good. Also, people have found they like the joystick feel rather than the sort of moving along a flat surface. You're able just to angle the joystick to move your mouse around. Some people like that. Then you have what we've called vertical mice, and that is, you can see here, this hand is kind of, I don't know, it's vertical, sure, it's not pronated or supinated, and you basically just rest it there. You don't have to actually use like a joystick function. It still slides on the desktop surface, but you're just holding it in the handshake position rather than in a pronated position. The same thing to a lesser angle would be over here, and you'll also see, you can see over here in the picture how that's really working. Hopefully you can zoom in here on the skeletal structure. You can see the ordinary mouse is pronated. The vertical mouse here keeps you in a nice neutral posture. You'll also see this over here, this unique mouse. You can't buy this model anymore because I actually wanted to buy one to test it out. It has the ability to sense your motion with the trackball, but also with some of these buttons in here. So here's a click, and so you kind of can put it around, put your wrist kind of through it, and hold it in a very unique posture. Unfortunately, they're not making this particular model anymore, so I'm looking forward to maybe something new that comes out similar to this so I can buy and try it out myself. I just found it kind of neat. If you really want to get crazy, you can actually do complete hands-free mousing. Probably the lower tech version would be the two at the bottom, the foot pedal or foot action ones. They have buttons to click with your feet. You can put kind of like a little slipper on your foot and move it around. I don't know about the ergonomics of the foot cushion slipper version. I'd have to really see it in action to address, because I'm not sure that moving your lower leg and ankle and foot is going to be any better for you than your wrist. Again, I'd have to see it, but at least it's something different. For those who already have some wrist upper extremity problems, this could be a solution. The foot pedal version, that one really is interesting because you don't actually have anything that you slide around. I'm not exactly sure how that one works, but they will tell you can program that foot pedal on the left there, the bottom left, to operate any keystrokes or any mouse. So you can use it like a keyboard too somehow. And then the top one is probably the more high-tech version. That's complete hands-free and foot-free. It simply recognizes where you're looking, so it watches your head turn and your eyes focus. So it's eye tracking and head tracking. And so you essentially look where you want the cursor to go. This is a little bit more modern. If it perhaps compares to some of the video game systems that are able to do motion tracking and understand how you're moving without having to actually touch a joystick or a controller. It's kind of similar to that. You mount it on your computer or you mount it on your head, and it follows how you look, and you simply activate that way. Now, I'm not sure exactly how you click. Maybe you have to speak. Not sure. There are other peripherals beyond the ones we've mentioned. Things like docking stations, iPads, chargers, adding machines, telephones, headsets, printers, fax machines, scanners. The office setup has all kinds of things beyond what we're doing here. This even includes things like filing cabinets, drawers, anything that could be changed or designed or added or taken away. Um, you want to think about these from an ergonomic point of view, especially if they are a standard part of your day. If you use a telephone every day, all the time, if you're on the phone a lot, if you're at a call center, I mean, it's what you do. You want to think about that. If you dock in your iPad and use it to work from, in addition to your normal computer system, if you have three different computing devices all in action at the same time, if you're scanning things, whatever, photocopying, you want to think about how often these things are used, what they're used for, and locate them accordingly, closer to you for the things you use the most, so you don't have to reach, bend, and get into awkward postures. You know, we also have to think about other things besides just neutral posture and good location and good, cool ergonomic devices. There are certainly other concerns that may be particular to individuals, and as always, we fit the task to the person, not the person to the task. That includes situations where there are disabilities, where we have an aging workforce, perhaps we're working with the elderly or people who are simply getting older, and those who are obese, and there are other concerns like this too. You can think about them, what they could be. Um, for ADA, if you're not familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's something you're going to have to deal with as an engineer designing work for people, because that act requires employers to make what we call reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations are perhaps in the eye of the beholder what's reasonable, but essentially you have to go fairly far out of your way to allow those with certain disabilities, not certain disabilities, with any disability, to be able to function the same as those without the disability to do the same work. So you can't simply say, well, I'm sorry, you can't work in this office because you're in a wheelchair because we don't have the appropriate equipment for you. You can't do that. You've got to make accommodations. And what might be considered good ergonomics for someone without a disability could be bad ergonomics for someone with it. So you can't just assume it's going to work. The aging workforce, perhaps the most important thing about this is that it's dynamic. If you set up an office workstation for someone when they're 45 and assume that when they're 65 it's going to work for them, just because you update with new software and you change your technology, but essentially the office is designed the same way, that may or may not function well. Maybe the lighting is no longer adequate as people's eyesight is worsened, or maybe putting it next to a high-pitch hummed vending machine is really getting on the nerves of the older person because they're having a hard time making out their phone ringing at the same time. There's a lot of issues where you need to take into account the fact that as people age, their capacities and performance abilities and simple comfort level changes, and we don't want to ignore that. Finally, as most people know, there's a problem with obesity in this country. The number of people that are above average supposed normal weight far exceeds those who are normal and below. And it's possible that ergonomic design, even when you design for the person in mind, those who are obese are going to fall outside of that range. That doesn't mean we can ignore them. Sorry, you're outside of our desirable range, even though this is your office. We have to take that into consideration. If the office equipment doesn't adjust well, the chair, the desk, maybe it's got a little flexibility but not enough, obesity can really bring that poor adjustability to light. So don't assume that, well, it's not perfectly adjustable, but it can adjust a little, that's going to work for everyone, because it may not. What I'm going to do on these last couple of slides is to kind of review and summarize some of the things, kind of put some of them together. So you might consider this kind of some good guidelines to look back on for later, but I certainly, don't stop now. Go ahead and finish the voice thread. But remember, these last 7 or 8, 10 slides, I don't remember how many there are, might be something that you want to review again later. So you're at the desk. How do you maintain neutral posture here? Remember, head and neck fairly straight. Maybe your neck can be cast down just a few degrees, but you certainly don't want to be looking beyond more than 10 or 20 degrees down. Your trunk, right, from hips to shoulders, need to be perpendicular to the floor, 90-degree angle there with the floor. Your wrist straight, that goes for extension and flexion, as well as ulnar radial deviation, straight, flat, not bent in any direction. 90 degrees are the rule. Elbows, knees, hips, ankles, lots of things are at 90 degrees. Make sure your feet are resting on something and they're not dangling. When you're thinking about an adjustable chair, you may want to zoom into these features again as a reminder. There's also a previous slide that has some adjustability features about chairs on it. Make sure that your lumbar support is adequate. What does adequate mean? First of all, it's not, it exists, and that it supports you. It actually allows you to sit in that erect posture with the proper curvature of your lumbar region, but that it's adjustable. In other words, you don't have to move your lower back to find the lumbar support, that the lumbar support can move to find you. You also need your seat pan to be adjustable. People's femur, your upper leg, right from hip to knee, that distance varies fairly significantly. So you want your knees to not be resting flush up against the edge of the seat. You want to have a little distance there. So in other words, you want to be able to scoot your seat back in, tilt your seat pan forward a little bit if you need to, adjust it in a variety of ways so that what you sit on is comfortable. The armrest should adjust in and out, up and down, right? Maybe even have some padding, or at least notice you have in this little picture, you have the waterfall part of it where it goes like this. That allows you to not have that sharp edge right on your wrists. And there are other things. Certainly you want the height to be adjustable because we all have different seating heights. We measure that in our lab. You want to be able to spin. You want to have nice large base so that we don't tip the thing over. Lots of other things you want to look for. When you're designing your workstation, don't forget about the kinds of peripherals you're going to use. Mouse, keyboard, other peripherals around the area. Don't forget that you need adequate space for these things. If you're going to write, you need to have space for that as well. So locate them appropriately. Keep the monitor away from glare. That glare could be coming from behind you, above you. It could be reflecting off of your glasses. It could also be kind of a contrast issue if you have a bright window right behind the monitor and the monitor looks dull. That's kind of a similar idea. Make sure that these things are in neutral posture and that the sharp edges that are around your work area are padded or otherwise covered or replaced entirely. And remember that the orientation of your monitor is a big deal. A couple of things we haven't emphasized just too much yet, and that's the desk design itself. A cluttered desk can take one that was ergonomically designed and really well designed and turn it into something poorly designed. So get the clutter out of the way. It's not just an organizational issue. It's not just a way to lose stuff. It's a way to actually cause you to have to work around things, to see over them, to write in areas that aren't good for writing, to move your mouse, kind of like mine is right now because my desk is a little cluttered. So my mouse is not in an optimal place, so I'm kind of reaching for it. A lot of things that clutter can do for you that are problems. So clean up, take the 5 minutes it takes to move things, file them away when it's time to file them, put them away, throw them away, whatever. It's going to be worth it for your back, for your neck, for your shoulders and your arms. So think about that next time you look at your cluttered work area. Make sure that it's big enough. If you're having to stuff things onto your desktop, is there another place they could go? So do you really have to have your phone on the desk? Well, you probably do if you use it every day, but if like my office phone, I never use it. I get a call a week. I can go put that on my conference table and I can get up when the phone rings and go sit at the conference table to take my calls. Think about those kinds of things. Make sure that your desk is at the right height. What can you do if it's too low? Well, if it's not adjustable, there are probably things you can do to elevate that anyway. Maybe you can get some wooden beam planks or something to just attach to the feet. There's some kind of low-tech ways to do that. Remember what we're doing in ergonomics. We're thinking about how we expend force, what we push and pull and move around, and we're trying to minimize that because fatigue is a big problem. It's not that we want to be people that are sedentary and never move anything, never exert a muscle. It's that having to do this with repetition and high force, we know those are risk factors for ergonomic injury, so we're trying to minimize them. So, do I want to roll across the entire main office 6 cubicles down to have a meeting in my chair, or do I want to get up and walk? Right? Even if I push my chair over, because rolling is in a fairly strange posture, especially if I'm kicking with my feet. If you thought about the amount of force that your lower back has to exert when you're kicking your chair across the room while you're in it, you'd be surprised. Remember that stooped posture graph we had, where you're just picking up a 1 pound object when you're in a bad back posture, how much back force that is? Imagine kicking yourself across the room, bad posture. Also, the way you store things. Do you put heavy things really high so that you have to pick them up at a bad, you have to reach high for them or you have to bend over for them? Can you put those in a more neutral location so you don't have to bend for the heavy things? Can you put them in the front or in the back, depending on how frequently they're used, so that you don't have to always move something to get to the thing that you use every day? These kinds of things really go a long way in the office, as well as, am I always having to go around something or go over something because I've got boxes in my way? Think about this. Don't forget about your environmental conditions. Not only is it a comfort level to have it warm or hot or cold or whatever in the room, um, and that makes you sweat or it makes you want to leave or it makes you unable to concentrate, but it actually, temperature can affect your risk of injury. Cold hands are not particularly um, well, they don't recover as fast as warm hands. So therefore, if you're doing a repetitive task and it's cold, that can increase your risk of injury. Think about noisy environments. Even if your noise doesn't directly affect your risk of MSDs, it's a concentration issue. It makes you make mistakes, and then you have to redo certain things. And if you're redoing things, that is causing more repetition. So in some ways, it does actually increase your risk of MSDs. And just a general feel of if the workplace seems cramped, it's kind of a concentration issue for some people. It can be an actual physical problem to always kind of be stuffed into a corner. You've seen the movie Office Space. Milton, the little funny guy, he's always complaining about how his office is getting moved and they're storing things in his cubicle and how he's stuffed into the back. Watch that movie sometime from an ergonomic point of view. It would be kind of funny. And don't forget your eyesight. Eye strain is one of the biggest problems in an office because so many times we're looking at backlit devices, monitors, iPads, other things like that. And we're basically shining lights into our eyes. That's what your monitor's doing. It's like having a flashlight shining it into your eyes. The closer you get, the bigger the problem. The longer you stare at it, the longer the problem. So don't forget to sit back, focus your eyes on something else, something that's not backlit. Read a piece of paper, read a book, magazine. Just look out the window and not at the sun, preferably. Look down the hallway. Get up and walk to the water fountain. Do any of these kinds of things to let your eyes have a break. Speaking of breaks, and this will be true for any job, not just an office. You should take short breaks pretty often. We call those micro breaks because this does a tremendous amount for you. What's a micro break? A minute. Get up, change your posture, allow different muscles to work. So if you've been keyboarding for a while, you've been using your upper extremities almost exclusively, get up and walk to the water fountain. Go to the restroom, go to the coffee machine, whatever. Get a soda. Do anything just for 30 seconds or 45 seconds. Go talk to your neighbor in the cubicle, whatever. That will allow your lower body to activate, your back to adjust to a different posture, and to relax some muscles and activate others that have been sitting dormant. Your eyes will refocus. It will do a tremendous amount for you. As I told you many times, in ergonomics, the body does not like something that's done overly repetitively, nor does it like something that's done overly statically. So don't do either, and micro breaks will help you even when you're busy. You'll get more done coming back a little bit more refreshed than you would if you sat through that micro break for a couple extra minutes of work, usually. Then every 30, 45 minutes to an hour, don't just take a micro break. Take a real break, a 3 or 4 minute break. Go to the bathroom is a good example. Go talk to somebody. Even just stand up at your desk. If you got a phone call, stand up and talk. Stretch, do that kind of stuff. Don't just take the eye focusing micro break, but take a real solid few minutes off. Again, you're going to make that time up and just higher productivity and more comfort, and less human error and concentration problems later on. This slide is kind of a good little reminder. You might want to zoom in and all the different parts. Pause the voice thread in a second. And then we'll just give you lots of good tips. I kind of like this slide just because it's a one-shot deal to remember a lot about the basics of office ergonomics. Now, it's not going to make you an expert, but it will help show to other people the kinds of things they can quickly do to make their office a little bit more friendly to the user, a little bit more designed for the individual. Well, that's it for the Office Ergonomics voice thread. I know this one was kind of long. I hope that you'll realize that the office setting is just as important as the manufacturing setting or the mining setting or the product design setting or whatever setting you might work in. The office, pretty much every business has somebody working in an office, so it's omnipresent. Some businesses are exclusively office driven, and it doesn't make it any less risky just because you're not doing things that people consider dangerous tasks. So make sure that you apply all that you know about ergonomics to the office. Consider those specific things that are only present in the office, and do a good job designing for the individual.